Tattooing has always been a very carefully curated illusion. It's the illusion of the underground. For the vast majority of its history, the American tattoo industry operated as a decentralized, fiercely independent counterculture. It was an economic ecosystem built entirely on fragmented, localized supply chains. Veteran artists hand-wound their own electromagnetic machines in private garage workshops. They mixed proprietary pigment formulations in small batches, meticulously guarding their color recipes from outside commercial interests. They shared their secrets only with their apprentices, and they viewed corporate involvement as a direct threat to the soul of the craft. If you walk into a traditional shop today, it probably still feels exactly like that. The flash on the walls, the heavy traditional work, the buzz in the air. Pull back the veil on that supply chain and you realize that the pirate ship is no longer being steered by artists. It's being steered by private equity firms, venture capitalists, and executives who used to sell mainstream consumer footwear. Over the past decade, the destigmatization of body art has transformed tattooing from an underground subculture into a highly lucrative mainstream consumer market. Today, nearly 1/3 of American adults possess at least one tattoo. The domestic tattoo industry currently generates over $1.6 billion in annual direct service revenue, supported by a network of more than 23,000 retail locations across the whole United States. And whenever an industry transitions from a localized hustle into a billion-dollar mainstream market, institutional capital notices. Today, we're following the money. We're going to explore the executives from the mainstream retail world that took over our tools and how the industry engineered a massive, inescapable subscription model disguised as ergonomics, and how the federal government is currently using public safety to quietly make independent tattooing illegal. To understand why Wall Street suddenly cares about tattoos, you have to look at the broader macroeconomic conditions of the global private equity market. Coming out of 2025, global private equity deal value reached an astounding $2.6 trillion. But with high interest rates elevating the cost of borrowing money, these investment firms are under immense pressure to generate reliable, bulletproof returns. They are increasingly abandoning highly speculative tech startups in favor of resilient niche B2B markets. And the tattoo supply chain is the absolute holy grail of a B2B market. First, it relies entirely on consumable, high-margin goods: needles, barrier film, aftercare, pigment. Every single time an artist finishes a tattoo, they throw half their setup away, and they have to buy more. It creates a highly predictable, recurring cash flow that economists call inelastic demand. Even in the middle of a massive global recession, a working artist has to replenish all their disposable supplies. Second, the industry was ripe for a specific financial maneuver known as the roll-up strategy. A massive private equity firm will step in and acquire one relatively large, healthy company to act as its platform. They will then systematically buy up dozens of smaller competitors. When you consolidate these companies, you eliminate back office redundancies and optimize global shipping. And through a financial trick called multiple arbitrage, the private equity firm creates hundreds of millions of dollars in value simply by merging the companies and holding the monopoly. The most visible and aggressive manifestation of this is a conglomerate called the Body Art Alliance, or the BAA. Formed in 2020, the BAA was architected through a strategic merger of historically independent entities. They acquired FK Irons, a premier machine builder. They acquired world-famous Tattoo Inc. They bought Peak Needles, and crucially, they bought the massive broadline digital distribution networks like Painful Pleasures, Ultimate Tattoo Supply, and Killer Ink. By controlling the manufacturing of the machine, the formulation of the pigment, and the fabrication of the needle, and the exact websites they used to buy it, the BAA successfully captured the entire economic value of one single tattoo procedure. But here's where the story takes a turn. To scale a massive empire, BAA bypassed veteran tattoo artists in favor of recruiting high-level executives from mainstream consumer apparel. Specifically, they brought in the executives who built the footwear giant Crocs. During the mid-2000s, Crocs transitioned from a niche boating shoe into a multi-billion-dollar global lifestyle brand through aggressive supply chain optimization and defending proprietary material patents. The former CEO of Crocs, Ron Snyder, took a predominant leadership presence within the BAA. He was joined by other former executives who brought decades of global brand scaling experience from places like Converse, Sperry, and PopSockets. The integration of these executives signals a fundamental shift. The industry is no longer guided by the idiosyncratic demand of the artist, but by data-driven supply chain logistics, aggressive digital marketing, and strict margin optimization. And it worked. By late 2023, financial news outlets reported that internal valuations of the BAA were targeting up to $1 billion. And the BAA isn't alone. Audax Private Equity executed a parallel consolidation through Nexus Brands Group, acquiring Eternal Inc., Bishop Rotary, and Critical Tattoo Supply. Furthermore, an operating company called Factory Capital recently launched Tattoo Partners with a $100 million capital raise, actively buying up legendary studios like Club Tattoo to package, franchise, and scale the act of getting a tattoo with the sterile efficiency of a corporate coffee chain. So the boardrooms were secured, the supply distribution was consolidated, but owning the brands wasn't enough to secure those billion-dollar valuations. To truly monopolize the industry, these corporations had to fundamentally change the actual physical tools we hold in our hands. Now, before we look at the trap, we have to respect the engineering, because the truth about this corporate takeover is that it has produced some of the greatest technological advancements this craft has ever seen. For over a century, the electromagnetic coil was the undisputed standard of the craft. It was effectively open source. The components were universal. You could buy a brass frame from an independent machinist in Ohio, coils from somebody in Texas, and run cheap needle bars. Nobody owned the ecosystem. But that open source freedom came with a devastating physical cost. Coils were incredibly heavy, loud, and vibrated so violently that an entire generation of veteran tattooers ended up with career-ending hand and wrist injuries, severe carpal tunnel, and permanent nerve damage. When institutional capital entered the tattoo industry, they brought massive research and development budgets with them. They poured millions into solving the ergonomic nightmare of the coil. They developed the modern wireless rotary pen. Now, these machines operate entirely without external clip cords. Their chassis are milled from aircraft-grade aluminum, engineered for perfect weight distribution and aggressive vibration dampening. Objectively speaking, these machines are undeniable marvels of engineering. They drastically reduce hand fatigue. They extend careers. But this technological paradigm shift was not an act of charity. It was a highly calculated economic transition designed to enforce one of the oldest and most lucrative business models in corporate history, the razor and blades model. Gillette sells you the razor handle at a loss, because they know you're forced to buy their specific high-margin replacement blades for the rest of your life. In the tattoo industry, their wireless rotary pen is the razor. The membrane cartridges, they're the blades. The architectural design of a modern rotary pen absolutely necessitates the use of a single-use plastic cartridge. Unlike traditional needle bar, a cartridge contains an internal rubber tension membrane. From a corporate finance perspective, this little piece of plastic is the ultimate recurring revenue generator. Cartridges are significantly more expensive to manufacture and significantly more expensive to purchase than traditional needle bars. They offer vastly higher profit margins. If a conglomerate owns the machine builder and they also own the cartridge manufacturer, they have created a closed loop. You are now paying a premium corporate subscription fee just to load your machine, and the financial lock-in extends to the machine itself through planned obsolescence. Proprietary lithium-ion battery packs suffer chemical degradation. Complex printed circuit boards fail. If your precision motor burns out, you can't just fix it. You're completely dependent on the corporate manufacturer's proprietary repair infrastructure. This has led to a profound suspicion within the community. There is widespread discourse that corporate conglomerates are actively leveraging their capital to lobby public health departments, aiming to legally mandate the use of rotary machines and membrane cartridges under the guise of enhanced safety. For many veteran artists, this is viewed as a hostile maneuver designed to outlaw traditional coil machines entirely. Now, we traded the heavy open source freedom of the coil for the lightweight ergonomic precision of the rotary. But controlling the machines and the needles was only step two. The ultimate threat to the independence of the tattoo industry isn't happening in a machine shop. It's happening right now in Washington, D.C. To understand how you legally kill independent competition, you have to look at the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022, also known as the MoCRA. Enacted quietly as part of a massive federal omnibus bill, the MoCRA represents the most significant expansion of the FDA's authority to regulate the cosmetics industry since 1938. Crucially, the FDA explicitly classifies tattoo ink as injected cosmetics. This specific classification triggers the absolute most stringent and punitive compliance frameworks within the entire law. And the FDA is not playing around. In July 2024, the FDA published a massive study where they tested 75 sealed tattoo inks. They found that over 30% of the samples were contaminated with pathogenic bacteria. Because of this data, under the MoCRA, the operational requirements for manufacturing ink has been fundamentally rewritten. You now have to formally register your physical facility with the FDA. You have to upload your exact chemical formulations into an electronic portal. You have to hire compliance officers to meet a strict 15-day report window for any serious adverse events. And most expensively, you have to fund rigorous third-party toxicological assessments and overhaul your physical infrastructure to meet federal good manufacturing practices. We're talking about millions of dollars in capital expenditure to build a hospital-grade ISO-certified sterile clean rooms. Now, if you read the fine line print of the MoCRA, you'll find something called small business exemption. The law states businesses with under $1 million in annual gross sales are exempt from the massive costs of the GMP compliance. This sounds like it's a protective measure for the small independent ink maker, but it's a trap. The legislation explicitly dictates that the small business exemption does not apply to any manufacturer that produces a cosmetic that is injected. Because tattoo ink is injected directly into the dermis, tattoo ink manufacturers of any size, regardless of revenue, are subject to the absolute full weight of the federal compliance. For massive conglomerates, complying with the MoCRA is simply just a capital expenditure. They have the venture capital backing to construct state-of-the-art sterile labs. For the independent ink maker, the financial burden is fatal. It means you either have to sell your intellectual property to a conglomerate for pennies on the dollar, you liquidate your company, or you operate in a criminal defiance of the federal law. The MoCRA effectively weaponizes regulatory compliance to legally exterminate independent competition. And the squeeze on the independent maker is an absolute global assault. The European Union recently updated their REACH regulations, implementing draconian restrictions that effectively banned pigment green 7 and pigment blue 15.3 for the use in tattoo inks. Manufacturers seeking to maintain global distribution must now fund massive R&D to formulate entire new REACH compliant pigment suspicions for Europe, while simultaneously navigating the MoCRA compliance in the United States. Once again, only the monopolies can afford these dual front costs. This corporate safety narrative is unfortunately being aided by the unregulated free market. Massive e-commerce platforms like Amazon are heavily saturated with cheap, unverified, and potentially hazardous counterfeit tattoo supplies. When independent artists try to escape the corporate razor and blades pricing to buy cheap generic needles or expired inks online, they risk the health of their clients. And every time a client gets a severe infection from a counterfeit ink, that provides the exact statistical data that the FDA needs to justify these draconian regulations. But the industry is not going to go down without a fight. Recognizing the regulatory narrative was being controlled by corporate lobbyists, a coalition of independent manufacturers and veteran artists formed the Tattoo Industry Manufacturers Alliance, or TEMA. They are engaging directly with the FDA, fighting to ensure that the impending standards don't become so prescriptively biased towards corporate automation that they inadvertently outlaw the survival of the independent artists. So where does this leave us as working artists? What is the moral of this entire deep dive? The answer to this corporate takeover is strategic autonomy. You don't have to throw out your new wireless rotary in the trash just to be a real tattooer. I want to be entirely transparent about my own setup. I run an FK irons, I run mass cartridges, and objectively, I do great work with those products. I respect the engineering, and I appreciate that the technology saves my hands and allows me to deliver the best possible tattoo to my client. But you have to balance the scale. If you use corporate machines because of the incredible ergonomics, you have to be hyper intentional about where you buy the rest of your gear. I buy and use Allegory ink, and Allegory is a perfect example of strategic autonomy in action. They are an independent, artist-trusted brand that makes an undeniable product, but they also proactively aligned with the new FDA safety standards to ensure they could survive without selling out to a conglomerate. Do not buy every single piece of your setup from the same corporate umbrella. Diversify your supply chain. Seek out independent cartridge fabricators, buy from tattooer-owned broadline distributors, and most importantly, support the independent ink makers who are currently fighting for their lives to stay compliant against the FDA. The soul of tattooing has always been independence. Today, preserving that independence doesn't mean rejecting technology. It means understanding the board we're playing on. It means that making sure the money we spend actually keeps this craft and the culture alive. Drop a comment below and let me know how you're navigating the supply chain right now. Protect your craft, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.